it's pretty much time to be exactly an hour, so we'll get up. If you're going to dinner, we'll get up. Okay, so thank you. Welcome all for coming, and let's get right back into this. So this is a three-part talk that covers first the geometry, the three-dimensional geometry that I use to build all the portals. So it's the sacred geometry employed, and then we'll go and cover all of the various portals I've been building since 2004, but then the third part is going to be covering future environments, inspired very much by where we are right now, Paolo Solari's Arcosanti and his concept of arcology. And so pretty much a mix of those three. And the reason I build the portals is to awaken the consciousness that we may all choose to live in sacred harmony and beauty with the earth and the type of environments that I'll be talking about at the end of this talk. Let's just dive right into this with the beginning of this whole journey, starting with studying environmental design at Parsons School of Design in the mid-'80s. And in part of learning about design, one of the key components of in all design is this concept of the golden ratio, or golden proportion, which is this ratio that you can take any length and divide it such that the larger is to the smaller as the whole is to the larger. In this ratio you can see A over B equals A plus B over A, which is this number, and it's an irrational number. It's 1.618, and it goes 0, 3, 3, and it goes on infinitely. But because there's a 0 in the fourth place, 1.618 is very close to exactly the golden ratio. But what that means is 0.618 is to 1, as 1 is to 1.618. But there's a lot more to this than just this weird irrational number. Why is this so important? Well, one of the ways we've come to understand the golden ratio is in this diagram called the golden rectangle, where you can make a rectangle where the side to the length of it is in the golden ratio. And then you can divide it into a square, and then continuously divide it into a square and a smaller golden rectangle, and another square and smaller golden rectangle. When you inscribe an arc into this, it creates what's known as the golden spiral. So here's a diagram that shows how the golden spiral is used in like pine cones, nautilus shells, sunflower seeds, but also just the golden ratio shows up. Like in a pentagram, the smaller to the longer part of the pentagram is exactly golden ratio. But in the human body, your finger, each section of your finger is in golden or approximately golden ratio. Your belly button divides your height in the golden ratio. There's studies of the proportions of your face that show the golden ratio keeps showing up. And the ancients understood this. So in ancient architecture and all through the various ages of man, the golden ratio is used in architecture and in art, because it is this underlying principle of how the universe uses to design. And another way to understand why this is so significant was discovered by this Renaissance mathematician named Fibonacci. It's interesting, the golden ratio is given the Greek name phi, the letter phi. And also like the number 5, you saw the 5-pointed star. And the fact that your fingers, 5 fingers, but your fingers have the phi, the golden ratio in it. Well, Fibonacci discovered this sequence that just by starting with the numbers 0 and 1 and adding them together, it doesn't look like it goes anywhere. 0 plus 1 is 1, 1 plus 1 is 2, 2 plus 1 is 3, pretty boring. But then it starts to get interesting, 3 plus 2, 5, 5 plus 3, 8. And as you go higher and higher, these numbers get closer and closer to being exactly the golden ratio. So just when you're up to the 3 digits, 610 to 987, is divided into each other as 1.61803. It's exactly the golden ratio, the 5 decimal places. And the higher you go, the more exact it gets. So it's a way to understand how the golden ratio, just from adding 0 and 1 together, is this underlying principle of how the universe works. So we're going to get into why the golden ratio is important to my portals in the second section, but now we're going to dive into the basic underlying of three-dimensional geometry. So the 5 platonic solids, the tetrahedron, octahedron, cube, dodecahedron, and icosahedron. These were discovered by the Greek philosopher Plato that satisfy these 2 rules of having the same shape face and the same number around each vertex. So tetrahedron, tetra means 4, there's 4 triangles with 3 triangles around each vertex. The octahedron has 8 triangles with 4 around each vertex. The cube, or hexahedron, has 6 squares with 3 around each vertex. Dodecahedron, dodeca, do is 2, deca is 10, so dodeca means 12, is 12 pentagons with 3 around each vertex. And the icosahedron is 20 triangles with 5 triangles around each vertex. These are the only 5 shapes that satisfy those 2 rules, but there's much more to them. And I won't be able to show, I don't have the animation to show how each one nests inside of each one completely, but I do have this incredible animation developed by a friend that shows how each one connects to the next by truncating either the corners or the edges. So you truncate the corners off of a tetrahedron, and it becomes an octahedron. You truncate the corners off of an octahedron, and we're going to stop halfway because it goes to a shape that's halfway to a cube, known as a cube octahedron. We'll stop for a moment there. There's the cube octahedron. And as you continue to truncate the corners off of that, it becomes the cube. Now, if you truncate the corners of a cube, it'll just go straight back to an octahedron. So what you do with a cube is you truncate off the edges equally. And as you cut off each edge of a cube, it becomes, interestingly enough, the dodecahedron. There's also a way to nest 5 cubes in the face of a dodecahedron. If you drew a pentagram on the face of each pentagon shape of a dodecahedron, it makes 5 cubes inside of it. But as you see here, cutting off the corners of the dodecahedron, it becomes that's halfway to the icosahedron, an icosododecahedron. We'll learn about that more in a moment. And it goes all the way to then become the icosahedron. So each of these 5 shapes relates to each other directly. So they're like the underlying principle of how 3-dimensional space is ordered. So what we're going to do is we're going to just really dive into these 5 shapes and their interrelationships, because they're really important for other reasons too. Starting off with the relationship of the cube and the octahedron. So as we saw, by cutting off the corners of either of them, when you get to the midpoint, you get to this shape known as a cube octahedron, which has both 6 squares and 8 triangles. But it's way more profound than just this shape, and Buckminster Fuller, who we're going to be talking about in the 3rd section, saw that this shape is really significant, and he actually labeled it the vector equilibrium. And the reason why is that you start with a sphere of unit radius, and you surround it in a plane. 6 more spheres will compactly around it. But then in 3 dimensions, 3 more can fit under it and 3 more above it. This is the closest packing of spheres. When you connect the centers of all these spheres together, starting at the center out to the corners, and then from the corners, you see that it creates the cube octahedron. But it's more than the cube octahedron. It's actually 8 tetrahedron pointing in, as you'll see in this diagram. But it's actually even more than the 8 tetrahedron pointing in. What's going on here is that when you study engineering, you make diagrams where you use vectors to represent energy. Well, in this shape, there's exactly 1 unit of energy pointing out to each corner, representing the amount of force that this shape wants to explode out. And it's in perfect equilibrium with the 1 unit vectors that are surrounding each of the edges to wanting it to collapse in. So this shape is in perfect energetic equilibrium. It would neither explode out nor collapse in. Everything is in perfect energetic balance, hence vector equilibrium. Now you can continue this shape out infinitely with tetrahedrons and octahedrons, and that makes what Buckminster Fuller would call the isotropic vector matrix. So this is just a unit of 3-dimensional all-filling space in energetic equilibrium. Now we're used to thinking of cubes. Well, cubes totally do not fulfill this. Cubes not only are not in energetic equilibrium, they're not even structural. This shape is totally structural. If you just built it, all of those triangles and tetrahedrons would keep this shape from collapsing. Cubes, if you built it without any structure in the corners, just totally collapse. So even though we're so used to the 90-degree vector matrix of cubes, this is really much more accurately of how the universe is operating and keeping in energetic equilibrium. So then, here's just a diagram showing what we just saw in the animation of the connecting the centers of all closest packed spheres to make this vector equilibrium. Now here we start with a cube. hopefully you can see that cube. And then what you do is you cross the faces of a cube in its diagonals and remove the cube. And it makes two tetrahedrons, one pointing up, one pointing down. But also a central octahedron that's surrounded by 8 tetrahedrons all pointing out. So this vector, this is a star tetrahedron. It's also known as the Merkaba in the New Age community. Merkaba is the Hebrew word for light body vehicle. And there are these meditations that people have discovered, the ancient meditations, that by meditating of a star tetrahedron of your energetic body, that you can activate your light body vehicle. But just in purely geometric terms, you can see that it's these 8 tetrahedrons pointing out that make it a perfect complement to the cube octahedron or vector equilibrium of 8 tetrahedrons that all point in. Which brings us, here they are too, the 8 tetrahedrons out, star tetrahedron, 8 tetrahedron in of the vector equilibrium. So that now brings us to this shape, which is a 64 tetrahedron grid that was discovered by the physicist Nassim Haramein, that calls the structure of the vacuum. And you can see that it's made of 8 star tetrahedron that are all connected radially. So if you take 8 star tetrahedron and connect them together, it makes this 64 tetrahedron. And here we're seeing it as a complete surface. And what's interesting about this shape when you see it as a surface is that it has 144 faces on its, as a surface. But mostly we see this shape represented, and I actually have the model of it in the back, as a grid. So you can see it. And what you don't see clearly, in the last animation you see that it's 8 star tetrahedron all touching radially in the center. But when I made this shape out of steel, I wanted to paint it out to see that it's not only a big star tetrahedron. You can see it's an orange and red star tetrahedron, but it's surrounded by a yellow cube octahedron. So this shape is basically both star tetrahedron and vector equilibrium or cube octahedron. But what is more difficult to see, but you can see clearly here, is that concentrically nested in the center is a half-size cube octahedron. So that this shape is not just 8 half-size star tetrahedrons making this double-sized star tetrahedron, but it's also concentrically nested cube octahedrons or vector equilibriums. So the 8 tetrahedron inward pointing principle of the universe, the vector equilibrium, is concentrically nested, while the 8 radially pointing tetrahedrons of the expanding principle of space or the universe is radially connected. So what's going on in this shape is that if you were to half all of these struts in the center, you'd have the exact same 64 tetrahedron shape, half size, in the middle. If you were to double all these struts and make a double-size one, it would make a double-size 64 tetrahedron structure of the vacuum shape. So you can do that infinitely. So this shape is a fractal. It's a 3-dimensional fractal that represents the underlying principle of the order of space. And in Nassim Haramein's work, what he's saying here is that this is actually the perfect energetic equilibrium of the structure of the vacuum, which, as we know, all of matter is made of these protons and neutrons in the center of the atoms, and these tiny electrons that are orbiting it with 99.99% vacuum. Matter is essentially, in space, is essentially this vacuum. But we come to understand, and there's in physics, there's this concept of the Planck's length, or Planck's unit. Well, a Planck's unit is to an atom as an atom is to us. It's trillions of times smaller. So this is what's taking place on the Planck energy level of the vacuum, is this ordering of space. And so all protons, neutrons, and electrons are just these manifestations out of the vacuum that are trillions of times bigger than this underlying fabric of space. So he calls it the structure of the vacuum. One of the parallels that I learned is in Tibetan Buddhism, there's a heart sutra that starts off by saying, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. And I couldn't help but note that that's synonymous. Form and structure, emptiness and vacuum. So this is the form of the emptiness. So to understand this is to understand our place in space and understand the fabric of space itself. Another interesting corollary is that it's made of 64 tetrahedrons. A tetrahedron is 6 lines, 3 of the base and 3 like that. There's also a Chinese divination called the I Ching that is made of 64 hexagrams that can explain all of the universe through this divination. So there's a 1-to-1 correlation between the 64 tetrahedrons and the 64 hexagrams of the I Ching. And another parallel I see is that all living organisms, when the cell is fertilized, it starts to divide into 2, then 4, 8, 16, 32, 64. And when it gets to 64, all of the cells are still undifferentiated. They're all identical to the very first cell. It's only after 64 cells does the cells start to differentiate into muscles or bone or head or toe. So there's this underlying relationship of this 64-ness to how we as living organisms come into being. And the one last correlation is that you can see this is a photograph, so it's not a perfect, but when you project this into 2 dimensions, it makes what you see on the right. That's a 2-dimensional looking from one corner to the other. And here is the flower of life, which is kind of one of the underlying principles of 2-dimensional sacred geometry. And you see that there's a 1-to-1 correlation of the intersections of the structure of the vacuum to the flower of life. Every single intersection lines up at the center of each of the circles of a flower of life. So a flower of life could be thought of as a 2-dimensional representation of the structure of the vacuum. So that's, now we're going to dive back into the 2 other platonic solids, the icosahedron and dodecahedron. We see how both of those, when you cut off the corners of either of those, becomes this shape that's both 20 triangles and 12 pentagons. And it's interesting, it's 2012, like the 2012 of the year that the Earth shifted into the next dimension. Anyway, the shape in my research came up as one of the evolution of the Earth's vibrational energy body taking place to hold this new energetic frequency of the consciousness that's arising. But there's other relationships of the dodecahedron to the icosahedron. If you add 5-sided pyramids or stellations to each face of a dodecahedron, it makes a stellated dodecahedron. When you connect the points together of that, it makes an icosahedron. And that's the shape that I have outside in the Turquoise Portal here now. So the dodecahedron, icosahedron interrelate that way. But then another third way is this rhombic triacantahedron that I learned about through a video by Drunvalo Melchizedek in 2010 called Birth of a New Humanity. As you see, you cross the diagonals of a rhombic dodecahedron, rhombic triacantahedron the long way, and it made the icosahedron. And here, when you cross them the short way, it makes a dodecahedron. So this shape, which has 30 rhombuses, is both a combination of dodecahedron and icosahedron. And the ratio between the short to long diagonals is exactly the golden ratio. So it's a golden ratio, icosahedron, dodecahedron. And then there's one more step involved where you connect the intersections of the dodecahedron and the icosahedron together, and it goes back to create the icosa dodecahedron. So that's only one step removed from this dual icosahedron dodecahedron. So this underlying relationship of icosahedron to dodecahedron is a very important principle as to what's taking place right now in the evolution of the Earth's vibrational energy body. Up until now, the Earth has been all of the 5 platonic solids, and at this time of the evolution of consciousness, it's embodying these relationships, this rhombic triacantahedron and this icosa dodecahedron. And these are the vibrational energy patterns that is, according to these researchers, Drunvalo Melchizedek, Richard Levitin, in their research, that is holding the new consciousness frequency taking place in the evolution of the Earth right now. So, that ends the section on 3-dimensional geometry, which brings us now to how I've been employing this knowledge in these interactive sculptures at Burning Man. So, Burning Man, I started going to in 1999. That was the first year that it had this layout of this city plan that it uses to this day. So it's a big radial layout where it goes from 2 o'clock to 10 o'clock, and from 10 o'clock to 2 o'clock is open playa that just goes out, and all of the different artwork is just arranged out in this playa, and you camp in the rest of the city. So when I decided to build a structure for Burning Man back in 2004, I thought that the time, when you tell someone, oh, I'm camped at 6 o'clock, or I'm camped at 9 o'clock, or my sculpture's out at 11 o'clock. Well, I thought, I'm going to place my sculpture at 11:11. Because 11:11, a lot of people see as an activation or synchronicity code to wake up to this new consciousness taking place. And what I did is I utilized this shape that I actually designed in 1984 when I learned about the golden ratio. And it was just they didn't give us an assignment that said design something based on the golden ratio. I just was kind of compelled to make this shape. And what it is, as you'll see in this diagram here, that starting with unit distance, I taper it so the top is the golden ratio to the base. And then centered on the golden ratio of the elevation, I make a golden ratio cylinder that goes through it. And then in plan view, it's 1/7. So 7 of these could fit into a star, but that makes the angle 51.4 degrees, which happens to be the angle of the Great Pyramid in Egypt. But I just felt like this angle, I just resonated. This was all done intuitively. It wasn't like any specific thing, but also you see the opening makes a perfect heart shape. I was also intuitively guided to make it this green color. At first I thought I'd make it flat black, like the monolith in the movie 2001. I thought black is going to get hot and it's going to get dusty. And I had seen this green in a vision that was this beautiful chartreuse green like you see of the heart star portal that's out here. And I decided to make the piece that color without thinking that green was the heart chakra. And I also wanted the center to be this deep maroon, rich color to complement it. And it was only after I built it and we sat inside of it that we were like, wow, this makes a heart shape. And wow, green is the color of the heart chakra. And then golden ratio also relates to the heart directly through what Dan Winter discovered, that when your heart rhythms are in golden ratio, you're in a state of coherence or bliss. And this was taken up by the Heart Math Institute that makes a biofeedback device so you can see when your heart goes into golden ratio rhythms and you can get into the state of coherence or bliss. So that was this 2004, I brought this shape, and also though I decided that rather than just have this structure you go into, and let's see, here we go. This is a bass feedback device I invented back in 1980 when I played in a rock band. I was seeing what the lowest note I can get my bass to feed back late at night just by myself. And it makes this weird rumbling sound. Obviously, through this little speaker and this recording, you don't hear it too clearly, but you can experience it out in the portal I brought here. And it's basically like a big cat purring sound, and it's a random sound. The strings are interacting randomly, and I don't know what notes they're tuned to, but they're very, very low, somewhere between like 4 hertz, which would be about 4 times a second, to maybe 14 or 15, but it's definitely subsonic. Sonic audible notes are 20 hertz. So and those are in the range of human brain waves and also the Earth's Schumann resonance. But I never have tuned in. I don't even know how to measure such low frequencies. I just get it to a point where it goes into this soothing feedback that is very relaxing. Like I said, a cat purring, or someone else said it sounds like the ocean. But also, it builds up and dies down over time, and it seems to react to different people coming and going. I've seen it really do very strange and very unusual things just by itself. It's like alive. So I put this quasar wave transducer inside the 1111 Diamond Portal at Burning Man in 2004, and people just started coming to it and sitting inside, or even if they couldn't fit inside of it, leaning against the surface of it. One guy showed up right when I built it. He says, "This is so cool, I'm not leaving." And I came back like 10 hours later, and he was still there. I said to other people, "Hey, why don't you come and check out the portal?" They're like, "No." I go, "Why not?" They go, "Because if we go in, we're not going to be able to leave." So it's hot. So this is a 11th golden ratio smaller pendant I made to give as a gift the next year at Burning Man. So what that means is if you made a golden ratio bigger one 11 times, it would be exactly the size of that. I brought it back to Taos, New Mexico, where I was living, and set it up over the winter there, and held some events there, held an event on 11/11, and it weathered the whole winter. It was almost destroyed in a windstorm, but I rebuilt it and brought it back to Burning Man in 2005. But I built the golden ratio smaller version as an outline, and I placed it, the golden ratio between it and the man, all on the 11/11 axis. So I started bringing golden ratio into the entire layout of Burning Man. So my friends who helped me bring it to Burning Man said, "We'll help you bring it, but we don't want to help you bring it back. You have to burn it." Now, I save everything for my whole life. I have stuff from when I'm a little kid in boxes. But because they said that, I said, okay. I put it on wheels. We dragged it over to the temple burn Sunday night and shoved it in to the temple. And that was the end of the original Diamond Portal. Of course, the other smaller one has gone into many, many events, and it's really ergonomic for people to do all kinds of acrobatics on it. And here it is at sunset at the Symbiosis Gathering. So a lot more practical in to be able to bring these around than the big full-size one. So after that one was burned, a friend of mine said, did you ever think of placing your portals on sacred sites? And I had studied things about sacred sites in the Earth's energy body back in the 80s, but by that time, 2005, I wasn't really thinking too much about that. I was just thinking about building these portals. But I looked it up, and I found this book by this author, Richard Levitin, called The Emerald Modem, A User's Guide to the Earth's Interactive Energy Body. And it details 85 different aspects of the Earth's energy body that he learned through meditation, not through scientific research. So there's a disclaimer at the beginning of the book and saying this is not like empirical scientific knowledge. If you want to verify this, he teaches the meditation that he did that contacted these higher dimensional beings that taught him. And all of these things relate to all the ancient myths around the world, from the ancient Chinese to the Mayan to the Nordic to all different, and the Egyptians, they all understood these features. But the very first thing he spells out in this book is on the cover of the book. He says that the totality of the Earth's energy body is this green cube that's pointing up, surrounding the entire Earth. But also, inside of every human's heart chakra is this a small green cube as a way to connect to the Earth's energy body. So it's all perfect. I'll just make a green cube pointing up as my next portal for Burning Man. So, and I decided to go from 1111 to move it to 1212, in keeping with these these numbers, these repeating numbers. And also 1212 is ever so slightly off of the 12 o'clock axis, kind of like where our heart is in the human body. So, I designed and built this cube where I cut out these squares. I cut the bottom off and cut out squares and then connected the squares on the inside, and you'll see it more clearly in the actual outline shape that I built the same year as the solid version. It's kind of interesting just to get an experience. This is the only time you can actually experience what it's like to go inside this emerald portal. And you can see the central part was painted that deep maroon. You can hear a little bit of the quasar wave vibrating it. Little lights in each corner. So here it is at Burning Man. And, there's little nooks in the bottom that 2 or 3 people could squeeze into, and 2 or 3 can sit in the top section. But I also brought the outline version, and you can see very clearly how by cutting these squares out and then connecting them underneath, it makes the cube octahedron. And as we saw, the cube octahedron is the fundamental unit of this 60-degree tetrahedron grid, as opposed to the cube being the 90-degree grid. So it's showing the relationship between this 90-degree grid that we're all used to and the 60-degree grid that's the more fundamental aspect of how the universe operates. And I wanted to shut up. Anyway, so here this has gone to a lot of other events with some kids playing on it. This was in San Francisco, where I set both of them up. And right after I did that in 2006, I was still living part-time. I lived in Taos, New Mexico and New York City. So in New York City, I was invited to build this structure for this event at the Brooklyn Lyceum, and it was to house all of the artists and performers and people participating in it. So I took the star tetrahedron and I cut, it's a little hard to see in this, but it's a slice out of the downward pointing one and the corners off of the upward pointing one. Much easier to see what I built. So these 3 tetrahedrons that would all connect together to make the upward pointing tetrahedron, and then the slice of the downward pointing one. So if you expanded these lines all outwardly, it would make a giant star tetrahedron or Merkaba for the whole space. And then with the video projections and the various artists and musicians, and there was like a silk screen station taking place in one of the corners, and it was a really nice interactive way of creating space there. So then, for Burning Man the next year, I get to the end of this book, and he talks about a couple of different features. One we already discussed is that the Earth's energy body is evolving to an icosed dodecahedron. But he also talked about this feature called etheric blue dishes that are underneath all sacred sites to collect the subtle cosmic energies and distribute it into the Earth and the Earth's atmosphere. So the first thing I thought of was, wouldn't it be cool to make a big sky blue dish that when you went into it, you just felt like you were floating in the sky? When I told this to a friend of mine I go to Burning Man with, I had no intention of actually trying to build something that big. But he was like, that's so cool, I'll help you. Whatever it takes, money, work, anything, let's do it. So with the sky blue dish as the the main idea, then I thought, well, we'll put these geometries in the center that are the evolution of the Earth's vibrational energy body. So, and then we moved from the 1212 of the Emerald Portal and moved it to 111, and because it was sky blue, sapphire is a precious stone that's blue, and also blue is the throat chakra. So we created this blue wall. It was 60 feet across, 10 feet high, with this one small opening. And you went inside, and then nested in the very center was the dodecahedron, that deep maroon red. It had the speaker for the quasar wave, and all throughout the wall were speakers too, so the whole space was vibrating. And then there was a mirror structure of the icosa dodecahedron with these stainless steel mirrors, and then it was shaded by an icosahedron. So it's these nested geometries relating to the evolution of the Earth's energy body. To get funding for it, we couldn't have afforded it to ourselves, and we were luckily introduced to some people that wanted to host a couple of dance parties, but they didn't want to be trapped inside of a wall at dawn. They wanted it to open up at sunrise. So I made a 30-foot section on wheels that, as the sun crested the horizon, shone directly into the space. And only at sunrise would we open it, and as soon as the sun got up into the sky, we'd shut it again. But it was a great addition to the way the space worked. So after Burning Man 2007, the center section went on to be exhibited in Taos, New Mexico as part of a grant for art in public places. I just so happened to be taking place in the town of Taos where I lived, and the theme was the Earth. So I explained, well, this is these geometries that relate to the Earth's energy body. So it was set up for 2 months outdoors in Taos, and it's gone on to be set up at many other festivals. It's pretty easy and convenient to bring around. But for 2008, we brought it back again, and it was set up way, way out there. Like, a lot of people even looked for it and couldn't find it because it was way out by the trash cans, way over a mile away from the man. And I invited, instead of the music parties, we had these sound healing. It was this guy, Jonah Kai, that I had met at a festival, lightning in a bottle, before. Oh, we don't have the sound. But so we brought out all of these didgeridoos and crystal bowls and vocals, and we had held 3 of them out there. So this was the beginning of using the portals for sound healing, along with the quasar wave vibrating it. As you can see, it really is conducive. So that's been a big focus of the work I'm doing now, is to create these spaces to host more sound healing. And that year I made a pendant for it, and you can see it has a small icosa dodecahedron in the center of this big dish shape. And I give these pendants out at Burning Man as part of the gift culture, and then I make them available for donations to help fund. So we have some here if you're interested. So then, also that year that I brought it back in 2008, all of my friends who had been going to Burning Man to help me, they were sidetracked to help another artist from Taos bring their sculpture. So I had to put a call out, and I formed what I at that time called the Portal Collective to bring it there. And so for the next year, one of my friends who'd been working with me on the Portal Collective suggested using the stellated dodecahedron. So before I built the full-size one, I was back in New York, and I made this outline version of it. So this is just a simple pipe version of a stellated dodecahedron. He also suggested that going from the blue of the throat chakra, that we make it go to the indigo of the third eye chakra, as we're raising the energy up to that. So then I proposed to build this version. And originally I wanted to make it the full form, and I couldn't come up with a practical solution, but I realized by cutting one point off, like you see the one here, it makes it very steady, and I had the outside be the indigo of the third eye, and the inside the green of the heart chakra, so it connects back to the heart chakra. And we moved it to 222 as part of those number systems. And as I found out, though, most people were so used to seeing my portals way out in the deep playa that that kind of didn't work. So that was the only time that I moved into the inner playa with one of the portals. This is a cardboard model that I photoshopped to represent what it would look like. And here's the actual finished thing in front of my workshop in Taos, New Mexico, and out at the playa, where both people can sit inside or lean on the outside to feel the quasar wave. And as you can see, it holds a good number of people, even though it's just 17 feet across, the whole structure. It all comes apart to fit on a trailer. And after Burning Man, it went on, well, there's the pendant of it, and it went on to go to Symbiosis Gathering, and this is at the LA DCOM. It was the Whole Earth Festival at the University of California in Davis, and it even got shipped to Portugal for Boom Festival in 2010. And this is at LIB where I've started to invite these friends of mine that do sound healing. This is Machu and Ani with their didgeridoos and Tibetan bowls performing sound healing in it. And then through that, I created my own event in Joshua Tree. This was in 2016 and 2017, Portal to the New Earth. And this is where it was set up there. And it's a gathering limited to only 200 people based on the sound healing and other teachings. And we also do some village building immersion after it. And it's held on a private square mile community called Garth's Older Gardens. It's been there for going on 40 years. So the reason why I chose to do it there is because Garth's vision is similar to my vision of inhabiting the earth in a sacred way. So there, you can find out more about that through my website, and we're gearing up to do the next one this May out there in Joshua Tree. So now, after working with this, as you saw, that shape is all 5-pointed stars. I decided to apply the 5-pointed star back to the original diamond portal. But instead of it being a perfect pentagram, I kept that 7-pointed star shape. So it's still the 51.4 degree of the original diamond portal, but it has now 5 points instead of the 2 of the original diamond portal, calling it the Heart Star Portal. And this was proposed, and it hasn't yet been built, but this is a Photoshop simulation of what a 16-foot tall version of it would look like if it could be built and brought to Burning Man. But what I did right then in 2010 was build the metal outline, which I have here. Here you see it before it got finished, but you can see the perfect star heart shapes that each hoop makes and the star shape in the shadow. And here it is at a recent event at Lucidity Festival, and it's been to many, many festivals. People, you know, constantly climbing, doing all kinds of acrobatics and yoga things on it. And at Burning Man, I put it on top of my van, so it's an art car, and we can all then go out and watch the man burn from climbing on top of this real simple, low-budget way to get a front row seat, which it used to be, that's 17 feet high. It used to be a really good seat. Now all the art cars are like 20 feet high, so if you park behind one, it doesn't work anymore. Okay, so now I was back in New York City, and there was this big Burning Man New Year's Eve party, and they invited me to do a piece for it. So I came up with a very simple, quick-to-build piece that's just an octahedron based on a meditation by Tom Kenyon. That channels the Hathors and does vocal sound healing. He has a website, tomkenyon.com, and he puts out these periodic channeled messages from these higher dimensional beings known as the Hathors. One of them was called the Holon of Balance, where all you do is meditate inside of an octahedron. You visualize yourself surrounded by an octahedron, and that's to help transit these chaotic times that we're in. So I thought, oh, I can build a octahedron out of some 2x4s and some corrugated plastic, and brought it to that event. And luckily, after the event, I had these friends that hosted these meetings in their backyard in Brooklyn, and they called it the One Love Portal. And what better place to set up the Holon of Balance portal than at the One Love Portal? And here you can see it being used for a crystal bowl sound healing. So this piece has been replicated the most of all the portals. I built the next one on my way to Boom in Portugal at the Secret Garden Party in England of 2010. I built another one for this event called the Moksha Art Fair that was during Art Basel in Miami. Another one that went to Burning Man but ended up at this retreat center in the middle of Utah. And then through Burning Man, someone asked me to build one for their rooftop in Silver Lake, LA. And then just last year, I went out to Okeechobee, Florida, to the Okeechobee Festival, and built this one. This is the first time, instead of it just being the white, I made it this gold. It's like a beautiful metallic gold, and I painted the Eye of Horus on top, and it's outlined with EL wire, so at night it just pops as this octahedron. So that now brings us to what I did in 2012 was this turquoise portal. Now I was guided, the first vision I had was the next portal is going to be turquoise, because the higher heart chakra between the green of the heart and the blue of the throat is turquoise. And in this time of evolution on the earth, we're activating our higher heart chakra. And turquoise being the color of the higher heart chakra, I felt like we just needed to be bathed in turquoise. So that was the original idea. I didn't know what I was going to build, but I knew it was going to be turquoise. But then, through watching Drunvalo Melchizedek's video on the birth of a new humanity, he talked about that rhombic triacantahedron. So I decided to use that shape. And here's a Photoshop representation of what I plan to build, as you can see out at Burning Man. But I was invited to go for January of 2012 to Rainbow Serpent Festival in Australia. And here it is. I flew over there. I built it in 1 week, brought it out there. And it went to another event at Starseed Gardens in Byron Bay. And in February to the Earth Frequency Festival, also near Byron Bay. And that one ended up there. Then I flew back to the States and talked to a friend. And he said, why don't you change? And if you notice, this one has 6 panels removed around the equator. For the next one, I came back in for April of 2012. This is at the Symbiosis Pyramid Eclipse event outside of Reno. I changed the configuration of the openings on it to make it a little more asymmetrical. And this is actually during the eclipse, watching it from there. And it went on to the Beloved Festival in Oregon. It went on to actually quite a number of festivals that year. I'm not going to show all of them. But of course, it ended up back at Burning Man. And you can see people looking to enter into it. And you can see it actually could hold, like I would estimate upwards of 25 people can fit inside of this shape, even though it's only 15 feet across. So what you see going on inside, though, is that all of these rhombuses are crossed to show the icosahedron and dodecahedron that makes up this full shape. And that one actually ended up at my friend's festival out at this place in Utah called the Jingstar Ranch. And this is the last photograph I have of it before this place was destroyed by a windstorm. So the whole structure and even this building and even that truck, the solar panels were smashed. It was an incredible windstorm that came through and wreaked havoc on it. So here is the little pendant of that rhombic triacantahedron. Now, of course, I called this the Turquoise Portal, and I did bring, let's see, that same grid, that icosahedron, dodecahedron that's inscribed in the rhombic triacantahedron. When I went for December 21st, 2012, I flew to Chichen Itza, Mexico, and with the help of this amazing guy, Sachi Om, who's on the same wavelength with all these sacred geometries, we drove to the neighboring town, bought all these copper pipes, and in just an afternoon and evening fabricated this copper icosahedron, dodecahedron, new Earth grid star, and here it is being used on the morning of December 21st, 2012, just a mile or two from the pyramids of Chichen Itza. Which in 2013, I went back to Burning Man with just a retrospective. You can see the Diamond Portal outline, the center of the Sapphire Portal, the Amethyst Portal outline, and the Turquoise Portal, rhombic triacantahedron. So in 2014, I came up with this idea for this wall based on the idea of the Sapphire Portal's blue wall, but making it earth-colored. And I was introduced to a group from Texas that had already designed this thing called the Pachamama Portal. And we collaborated seamlessly together. You would never believe that these were two completely separate projects. But all I had planned to do was build this very simple, smaller, 40-foot diameter, only 8 foot high. It's actually 7 feet because of the angle of the 8-foot panels. And I painted it with the actual playa, so it would blend straight in. Well, they had this 9-foot diameter photographic representation of the Earth. It's an exact, perfectly made from satellite photos of the Earth stitched together. And it sat on top of this dodecahedron that had all of these sound healing instruments in it. So there were didgeridoos and stringed instruments and drums. And it was sitting on top of this base that had this organite that was grounded into the Earth with copper and zinc rods. And we made all of these amazing lotus petal couches to then look up at the Earth. And they were just planning to put this out without that wall in the middle of the dusty playa. And I said, well, this is going to work a lot better if we collaborate. And I had, mounted inside the wall was the quasar wave vibrating the whole space with the rumbling, purring sound. And here's a picture at night. And a friend of mine came and sat in one of these hammocks and looked up at the Earth. And she said, this is the closest I'm going to get to feeling floating in space and seeing the Earth. And it really did look like the Earth floating in space. It's pretty amazing how that worked out. So then, for the next year, and also, as you saw, the number of it was 1144. The 44 was coming up a lot. And the Pachamama Portal wanted to be out in the middle of the playa, so I thought 1144 was a good central location for it. For the next year, there's 1155 being 5 minutes to midnight. And the idea, I chose this other artist that I met at Burning Man that always put their sculptures all the way out at the very 12 o'clock furthest point at Burning Man. And she made all these quirky paper mache interactive things. And even when we met, she said that she was inspired by the original Diamond Portal to do her work out there. So we chose to collaborate with her on what we call the 1155 Reformation Portal. And the Reformation came because Larry Harvey, in an interview for Forbes magazine on the billionaires at Burning Man, said his mission with Burning Man was to reform the 1%. And of course, with my concept of the portals being these evolutionary interfaces to evolve consciousness, it is along the lines of that. So what we did is we had all of these, she put these like bougainvillea paper mache vines that is kind of like the way plants grow, kind of like DNA spirals. But right at the entrance are these two beings, and there's a wedding taking place. And the concept is it's the wedding between the Egyptian god Ptah and Sekhmet. And Ptah representing the god of creation and Sekhmet the goddess of destruction. So this reconciliation of opposites. And throughout the space were these other cat-like beings that, I won't go into all the details, but they all have this underlying, they were based on the burghers of Calais, who gave up their lives to save their village. So, and also as you see, there's a wind and solar power. This is the first time I had my own generation for the power of the sound and the lights in the space. And we also invited tea ceremonies to take place in it, and I also had sound healers come out, and it had a sound system playing Tibetan bowls and other meditations, and we had live sound healings take place in the space. Which then, for the next year, I decided to move it all, and it was really successful. It was way out at the very, very furthest point, straight out, just off the 12 o'clock axis. So for 2016, I decided I wanted to move all the way over to the most hidden corner of Burning Man at 144, which is a very powerful sacred number, and all the way out where the trash fence, and just keep the whole space just very simple. And what we did is I set the Diamond Portal, and it was pretty profound how the Diamond Portal angles lined up perfectly with the entrance of it. And we kept the space very pristine and peaceful with just these various, as you can see, these colors here, blue and purple, and we made these little stations for each of the chakras. So it went from, actually, it started with red, orange, yellow, green was in the very back, and then with the blue and purple going through all 7 colors of the chakra stations. And it was just a very peaceful place and way off to the side to escape from everything else going on in Burning Man. This entrance was aligned perfectly, and the whole thing was aligned perfectly with the sunrise. So when the sun would come up, it would come up right through the center and right through the wall. So this piece actually, 2016 at Burning Man, was dismantled, put on a trailer, and it's still sitting on a trailer right now where I'm planning to be setting it up on my property in Joshua Tree to start to use it again for this purposes. And as you can see, I used the icosahedron mirror structure from the Sapphire Portal. And this is the pendant, and it has this logo that looks kind of like a crop circle, and that's a logo that is my friend Mark Sims, who created the wind and solar power for it. That was the logo for his wind and solar power company. And you can see it's made of 11, it's a 12-sided shape that then has 3 sides each, but the one side is open. So it's 11 on the inside and 33 around the outside, which are all very powerful numbers to bring into the shape of this space. So then, for last year, I was proposing to build this new shape that is a stellated rhombic triacantahedron, but when you stellate it to exactly the right point, it makes 5 octahedrons. And we saw in the octoportal, octahedrons are very balancing. So I came up with this idea to make it turquoise again, and this is just a model of a compound 5 octahedron or stellated rhombic triacantahedron, but I was unable to get the funding or the ability to produce this piece, so I just went back to the tried and true Amethyst Portal and recreated it as the new Turquoise Portal. And what's very interesting, and you can see it here too, and you'll see it better, this was at the Oregon eclipse where it made its debut and then went on to Burning Man. And it's a little bit because of the lighting, but more because it actually is 4 different colors. It goes from green to less green, less green, less green. And the idea is to be raising the energy through the colors from the green of the heart to the higher heart through the colors. And then the inside is painted the indigo of the third eye. So it's to connect the higher heart back to the third eye. And as you can see, or experience here, it does hold quite a number of people, and all kinds of things spontaneously happen. This guy showed up with the saxophone, and he's playing along with my friend Durian Songbird on an ocarina. So that brings us to the end of my portals. That's where I am up to this day. And of course, as I was mentioning, I have all these various pendants, and there's a few of them available if you're interested to get them. But also, I was never able to create these too easily, but my friend, new friend, David Diamondheart, who's here, has modeled these on shapeways, so you can actually get in various different metals, the Diamond Portal outline, the Heart Star Portal, and also, amazingly, the Emerald Portal. So these are all available, and they're all on my website to easily link to the site to find these various portal outline models. Okay. Good, I'm pretty much a few minutes behind schedule, but now we're going to completely jump off to a whole other talk, but it's why I build these portals. The intention of these portals is not only to evolve consciousness, but to evolve it to the point where we choose to live in sacred harmony with the earth. And that was my that's my whole true intention, is to create eco-villages and eco-cities. And I first got inspired by it by learning about Buckminster Fuller and this book called SYNERGETICS, which is called Explorations in the Geometry of Thinking. And synergy synergy, here's the definition exactly, is the behavior of whole systems unpredicted by the behavior of their parts taken separately. And synergetic geometry embraces all the qualities of experience, all aspects of being. It involves geometric modeling, exploring interrelationships in the face of experience and the process of thinking. Synergetics endeavors to identify and understand the methods that nature actually uses in coordinating the universe, both physically and metaphysically. I mean, Buckminster Fuller is one of the most profound thinkers of the 20th century. Unfortunately, the Institute for his work is being embraced, and they have a foundation, and they give out a grant each year to people thinking along these lines. So we're just going to cover a few of his quotes. He's most famous for his geodesic dome, but this is one of his quotes he's really famous for. You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. And here, of course, is one of his models of a geodesic dome, but he had this concept called the design science revolution. It's the application of our highest technological capabilities to enable all humanity to live sustainably at an unprecedentedly higher standard of living than ever been experienced by any. And it can be accomplished while phasing out future use of fossil fuel, atomic energy, and living entirely on sun-derived energy. He also came up with this idea of looking at the globe by laying it out on an icosahedron and spreading out all the continents to see that we're really on almost one big island, all surrounded by an ocean. He also has this idea of ephemeralization, is the ability to do more and more with less and less, until eventually you can do everything with nothing. His vision was that will result in ever-increasing standards of living with ever-growing population despite finite resources. And it is true. We can see even our cell phone is the ability to do a lot more with a lot less. But we can do this in all aspects of our being. And people say, oh, population growth, 7 billion people. But if you put 7 billion people with enough room to comfortably stand close together, not crowded, they would fill up a tiny, tiny area. Just a few, I forget exactly what it is, but it's really, really small. And most of the earth is empty and not filled with humans. So if we use our resources in this way, we can really provide, like he says, a standard of living better than the richest billionaire could afford right now. Because with everyone working together to do this, we would actually have a higher standard of living. When I say standard, it would be more beautiful, more sustainable, more sacred. All the money in the world can't create that right now. It's only through doing it together.
Are you saying if you spread the population out more amongst the land?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that population growth isn't an issue. We could have 14 billion people on the planet. If we employ these principles, everyone could live. We won't run out of resources. It's scarcity thinking that does that, either you or me. You have to shift to abundance thinking. The universe is about abundance, and there's an abundance of everything. You know, even this idea that fossil fuels are going to run out, there's this concept of abiotic oil. We call it fossil fuels because they say that dinosaurs and plants and things died and that's what we're pumping up. And yes, a good percentage of the shallow oil that we're digging up was created through this idea of these ancient earth living organisms. But they're actually drilling wells that are 30,000 feet deep, and the oil that's coming up from those wells has no biological matter in it at all. It seems to be a mineral form of oil. And there's some ideas that there is a never-ending supply of oil. And also just the way we think about the earth and water and things, we think of finite, we think of things dying, ending. But actually, the earth and the universe is not made up of atoms. It's made up of stories. An atom is a story. Entropy and things running out and dying is a story. Abundance and things being eternal and things being constantly created is another story. If we start to see the universe as in constant abundance and constant creation, we're never going to run out of anything. Things aren't going to die, they just go through phases, seasons, things. But it's a matter of how we think and the stories we tell ourselves that shape our reality, not the limiting beliefs that we're embedded in right now. Let's see, one more quote. Oh, this was his 1967. He built one of the largest geodesic domes, and this is my all-time favorite quote. I carried it around in my wallet along with my money for many years until it totally wore out, and I had to dig deep to find it. And he starts off by saying, I see the hydrogen atom. The reason why he says hydrogen atom and not all atoms is because scientists understand that 99.9% of the visible universe is hydrogen, and it's only through the stars and solar furnaces that all the other atoms come to be. So you could say all atoms, but in his quote, I see the hydrogen atom doesn't have to earn a living before behaving like a hydrogen atom. In fact, as best as I can see, only human beings operate on the basis of having to earn a living. The concept is one introduced into social convention only by the temporal power structures, dictums of the ages. He had a way with language. If I am doing what God's evolutionary strategy need to have accomplished, I need spend no further time worrying about such matters. And really, think about it. The earth doesn't pay the sun a bill each month for the amount of energy we get. And birds are not paying for all the things that they're eating. The whole universe operates without money. It's only by these structures that have been set up by humans that have created this money system. So we really can, and there's some great thinkers out there that are working to get us beyond that. But Buckminster Fuller was one of those thinkers that talked about that we don't really need money. We just need to think about what we need to do with the evolutionary strategy of what the Earth is doing. Which brings me to Paolo Solari. I discovered this book, Arcology, City in the Image of Man, in 1980. And the idea is that arcology is architecture and ecology merged together, and he had this vision of these three-dimensional cities that take all cars and streets out. Now, I lived in New York City most of my life, one of the densest, culturally rich cities on the planet. The majority of space in New York City is for cars and streets. And then the buildings are all separate. Even if there's giant buildings, you have to go down into the streets and up. His vision is one giant megastructure, taking all the cars and streets out to make this culturally rich complexity miniaturization space, but integrating ecology into it. So when you walk out, it's not this harsh cement environment, but there's fruit trees and gardens and water flowing and animals and birds all integrated into the fabric of the city. And I was really greatly inspired by this. This is a couple of pages. The first half of the book are these flow charts just to show how you can see the thinking. And the second half are all of these amazing drawings of these megastructure arcologies. Of course, he's been here at Arcosanti trying to implement these concepts since 1970, and I see a huge chasm between what he proposed in concept and what was actually being built and the way he went about building it here. Because the city, of course, and he wants it to be culturally rich, but that means that different people get to live there and choose the way they live and choose what they do and choose how they live. And he never allowed for that to happen here at Arcosanti, where in a true arcology, you would have to make room for everyone to share their visions of architecture and their way of living and what their livelihood is. Of course, here's just a couple of pictures of where we are. Don't need to show that too much since you could just walk outside. And of course, I was here for last year's Convergence. But now that brings me to, both of those people prompted me to go to design school and study environmental design. And through that, I learned about this brilliant architect, Bruno Taut, who right after World War I, he published this book called Alpine Architecture that was actually out of print and very hard to find. You could only find a page or two reproduced in an art book and a few quotes of it. And in 2004, they reproduced the entire book with every thing translated and footnotes and all. And unfortunately, it's back out of print, and these books now go for like hundreds and hundreds of dollars. But this is what he drew in 1917, these visions of crystalline cities adorning mountaintops, and cities in canyons where all the water is just flowing through the middle. And he had this whole concept that humans were organisms of the earth, to beautify the earth and live and work with the earth, not to just benefit humans, but to benefit all life on the earth in a very sacred way. And here's one of the crystalline cities on a mountaintop, and this is a little translation of the German text. Engage the masses in a great task which fulfills everybody, from the humblest to the foremost. Each sees in the great communality clearly the work of his own hands. Each builds in a true sense. So he wanted everyone to come and build these beautiful, sacred, crystalline cities. And really it's inspirational when I learned of his concepts. Well, what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to jump through a handful of my favorite other designers, besides Paolo and besides Bruno Tau, and for you to get a synergetic combination of your own, to see these various thinkers and then combine it so we can have new ways of inhabiting. And I'm going to put out some of my ideas of how I combine all these different thinkers. This is William Catavalis and the Guild of Organic Design proposed back in 1959, this concept that architecture could grow just like living organisms grow, completely organic design. Of course, it's just a concept, but he's planting the seeds for this way that architecture can become living architecture. And then Glenn Small had these concepts that are very much like an arcology, but it's his own vision of these, what's called the vertical city or the biomorphic biosphere megastructure. And in it, he saw that you have these autonomous living pods that can move to different parts of the city, and the city has all of the nature included in it. And it would go from various different climates, from lower altitude to higher altitude. We actually got very close to building this green machine structure in Venice Beach in 1969, where he proposed this big megastructure grid that you could plug in, and you could see there's like an airstream, but he also had the idea of using airstream kind of technology to make these mobile living pods that could then move around the structure or to other structures if you want to move somewhere else, but integrate living organisms into the whole thing, so it becomes a very green, livable, three-dimensional space. When I was studying at Parsons School of Design, the head of the department was James Wines, who had an architectural art firm called SITE, which stood for Sculpture in the Environment. And they actually built a number of different things. They were most famous for taking the Best catalog showroom, which now has turned into Best Buy, but back then it was called Best, and he actually made the facade crumbling bricks or the corner opening up. They were very quirky takes on architecture and art merging together. But this proposal here was to build a skyscraper grid, but then allow people to build their suburban homes into a three-dimensional, instead of suburban sprawl like Paolo talked about doing away with. Here you could have suburban sprawl compacted into like an arcology. This actually hung in the Museum of Modern Art for many years alongside other great architects' works like Corbusier and Frank Lloyd Wright. But then this is Eugene Tsui in 1991 proposed this 2-mile high sky city that would have these different levels, and it would control the environment inside to create a different temperate climate inside, even if you're not in a temperate area. And another one of these huge megastructure kind of arcologies called City by the Ocean. And again, these are like just the concept of building a megastructure arcology by other designers. Also, Jacques Fresco, he just passed away at like 100 years old, but he has something you learn about called the Venus Project. And again, he wants to incorporate sacred geometry and living organisms into these beautiful cities. So just to show a representation and a little model of what the Venus Project is proposing. Very much along the same ideas as Paolo, but he doesn't even talk about Paolo or arcology when he proposes his concepts, which is too bad. I feel like everyone should kind of work together to get these ideas out here. And then Dr. Mitchell Joachim, who is a double PhD and teaches at MIT and at Columbia University and has his own business to work on these new developments called Terraform, he proposed in 2005 this concept of the Fab Treehouse. He's like, why don't we cut down trees, cut them up into pieces, and then put all those pieces back together to live in it? Why don't we just take the tree, the living organism, and have it grow into our house? It's never been done, but at least he's proposing it as a concept. And here's his concept of the post-carbon city-state. This is a photograph, an actual photograph of one of the avenues in Manhattan, and how he sees it can be transformed with a stream running down the middle and beautiful green pedestrian walkways and easily accessible public transportation, and all the buildings are covered with greenery. That brings us to the most recent discovery is this architect. He's a Belgian architect practicing out of Paris, and he's not very well known in the United States, but in the rest of the world, he is super successful and popular. This is a proposal for the harbor of Hong Kong. That's what it looks like now, and this is what he's proposed in these, again, green megastructure towers. And then in India, he has this Hyperion structure that, again, is a three-dimensional apartment building, but it incorporates all the greenery to make for this beautiful space. And in Mosul, Iraq, all of the bridges were destroyed in the war. So he has this proposal. You can see these giant drones, and what they're doing is they're 3D printing this module, but you can see the whole structure is made of these little individual modules. There's the drones flying, and the water is flowing off in waterfalls. And he does this incredible job of representing everything with these computer graphics, but they're really only one step removed from actually being realized. So here you are inside the bridge to see what it would feel like inside, and you can see it's made of all of these individually arched cubes, and here's what it would look like inside of these arched spaces and looking out onto the terraces. And he's actually building, and is about getting ready to open in Taipei, Taiwan, this helix spiral building. So he's really getting a lot of recognition, and pretty exciting. That's brand new, so Vincent Caliber. So now that brings us to my own personal synthesis of all these different thinkers. So there was this book written by this incredible author, John Michel. The first book I read of his was called The New View Over Atlantis, and it popularized the ideas of ley lines, and also looked into like why a foot is a foot and why there's 5,280 feet in a mile. And there are really, really significant reasons for it. They are not random or arbitrary. They are ancient sacred units of measure and ancient sacred relationships. In this second book of his, I don't know second, but in 1988 he wrote The Dimensions of Paradise, where he shows this thing called the Heavenly City Plan. And it's a very interesting way of generating it, but in the end, you have 12 circles all around a central circle. So in using this sacred geometrical diagram of the Heavenly City Plan, I incorporated with the concept of archaeology and also in the numbers. So each of the diameter of each of these is, well, each of these pathways is 314 feet wide, making it wide enough, you'll see in a moment, to have an inner street, a central street, and an outer street with these 75-foot building lots for human-scale buildings. Each of these is 2,160 feet across, making the whole thing a little less than 2 miles across. Actually, you can see it right here. That's how big it would be in relationship to San Francisco. Very human scale, very easy to get around this whole thing. And it's these spiraling ramps that are 144 feet apart for each time it comes around in the spiral. So if you're living on this, and you'd be living on it with rooftop gardens and gardens out your door, and even streams that would be able to flow down through it, and you'd be able to coast down. And as you're coasting down the streets, if you need to go to a higher level, where the levels intersect would be these elevators big enough to bring in, there would be, this is accessible obviously for walking or other like skateboards or bicycles or small human scale like golf cart type of vehicles that could coast down, use regenerative braking for electric, or just be totally coasting and just go up on these elevators, and everywhere you go you could just coast or take an elevator to get to this space. And also, humans tend to segregate with like. Like I lived in New York City, and like the East Village were all the hip people. The Upper East Side were all the more, conservative. And even like Wall Street was where all the business finance took place. And there was the flower district, and there was the garment district, and there's the West Village where all the gay people like to live together. Humans like to live in community naturally. Each of these 12 spirals would then naturally segregate to be each of the types of spaces that you like. But they would also overlap, so wouldn't be completely segregated. You can go to each of the other ones to do whatever you like. So maybe one of them is where like all the foodies and all the restaurants would be focused. Another one would be where the schools and universities would be. Another one, you know, just geared towards the natural segregation. And the 12 is a very natural ordering, just like we have the 12 zodiac signs. And this is just a rough representation of what it would look like with the water, the trees, human scale buildings. You can see some wind power integrated into it. Now that brings me to the idea that we as humans have been shaping the earth to our needs. These are ancient rice paddies in Asia. And here's another shot of rice paddies with like a village incorporated into it. And here, of course, is a much more modern dam, but in this, where we dammed and made this man-made lake, you could also see that human habitation is integrated into it. Often dams are made and no one's allowed to live around the lakes. And here is in Holland, this was an ancient fort that once they didn't need to be fortified anymore, it became a village with the water integrated all around. This is Brasilia. Now Brasilia both is built around this huge dam and lake. The unfortunate part about Brasilia is it's not on human scale. It was designed in 1960 based around the automobile. So it's a sprawling, very austere, inhospitable place to live. But if once we start to integrate water on human scales, this is a little village in the Netherlands where there's only walkways and waterways to get around to all the houses. And this is how I want to live. I want to walk out my front door and I don't want to have a parking lot where I drive to the mall. I want to be able to get on, either walk or get on a bike and just see beauty and all around me. So here is, in Florida, it's very low-lying. So here's where they built a community where they had to make waterways in between all the houses. It's a step in the right direction. And here's actually where my parents retired to the Woodfield Country Club, where again, it's waterways. It's hard to see the dark water and all the houses, but the majority of the land is given over to a golf course. What I see is the very first step to shifting towards this is do something like this, but instead of golf courses, it's all of the gardens where all the food is being grown. And instead of a central country club with a big restaurant, and where instead of all the people who work there having to commute from half an hour away that do the gardening, that work in the restaurant, everyone lives there, everyone grows the food, and you have your restaurants there, and also it's just completely culturally rich. There would be studios, woodworking, metalworking, ceramic, glass, dance, theater, music, all of those facilities there for anything culturally possible to be created, and you'd have all the galleries and performance spaces there. And even stores to be selling the jewelry and the crafts and the things being made in one integrated community. So it's like just taking a model and just tweaking it a little bit so we can get to where this vision is going. Now, here I just want to show Tamara, which is one of the intentional communities that is open to teach other people. And you see they do integrate water directly into their community. And I'm going to end with my images with this conceptual thing I just came across that was the idea that this was ancient Atlantis. But you see these circular rings with beautiful architecture and water all integrated into it. The next image, which I'm still working on being able to present, is to go into, like I said, with the terracing, be able to go into where a river is flowing out of a mountain and there's no land to actually build, and start to terrace that and channel the water and make human scale terraces where the water is all flowing, and once the water comes out of this community at the bottom of this terrace community, it should be even cleaner than when it comes into it, because there's like the living machine that was just developed by John and Nancy Todd that can take completely toxic wastewater, and through flowing it through the right plants and fish and other things, the water that comes out is perfectly crystal clear spring water. And we have this knowledge. It's all been developed. It's just a matter of us now starting to wake up to this and make the choice that we can learn to live and inhabit the earth in the most, instead of it being, is it the most economical, we should choose to be, is it the most beautiful? Is it the most sustainable, regenerative, and the most sacred way for all of life? So thank you very much for coming. Open to questions.
When are you building?
When?
When are you building?
No, right now we're in the conceiving stage. So we want people to start to meet, and this is to go out into the world in general, be implemented anywhere. Actually, something that I just learned about a few months ago was in India. They are creating this village in the middle of the desert. The first thing they did was go in, dig all these trenches, plant all these trees, and then start to collect all of the water It's called DUHN, D-U-H-N. So there are other people implementing similar ideas, but it's a matter of just bringing everyone together, like-minded people, so we could all start to really just not think about it, but do it. You know, I hope to one day start something similar to this place here, and yet be more open to the collaboration for everyone having their say in how they will grow. But also just guided by the higher principles, the universe, the evolutionary intelligence of the universe to just channel through us. The universe wants to succeed, and we just have to be the agents for it, and all we have to do is tune into it.
Let's do it.
All right. And so in the back are a few pendants, and there's a book.